welcome to our webcast. I'm Nicole Bucala, CEO of DataBee by Comcast, and I want to thank you all for joining us today. We all realize that the vast amount of security data generated today is hard to manage, and many organizations find themselves frustrated with keeping up and with the trade-offs they need to make. We're going to talk about that and much more today, and I'd like to welcome our guest speakers, Nooper Davis, the Executive Vice President and Chief Information Security and Product Privacy Officer at Comcast and DataBee co-founder, and Edna Conway, CEO and founder of EMC Advisors. Ladies, welcome. Thank you so much for joining me for this conversation today.
Delighted to be here.
So excited to be here.
That is so awesome. So Nooper, it's 2025, and you have been on the security data fabric journey for 7 years. You are a leader in this space, perhaps one of the CISOs that really kind of, led the architectural transformation away from SIEM, embracing the concept of the data lake. It has been so inspiring to so many of us. Can you just start by telling us some of the cool problems and questions that you're now able to answer?
Oh my gosh, yes. It's actually what I now tell my team is there is no question that I feel is audacious enough that I can't ask. So, and I almost always get an amazing response. So let me tell you, I'll go latest. So just 2 weeks ago, I don't know if everybody watching knows what RMMs are, but it's basically a remote management access. So we just finished rolling out phishing resistant authentication, feeling really good. But then of course there are these RMMs, team viewer, other things, where if somebody actually connects through an RMM to your system, then those controls are bypassed, right? So our question was, hey, can we find all the RMMs in use in our company? And, audacious question, because first of all, there's no good list of, what all the RMMs are in the world. So, the team got together, found an open source website where they have, all of the RMMs with their, then we baselined the regular RMM use of our, approximately 350,000 workforce, because, with the workforce as big as ours, people will be using RMMs for very legitimate reasons, right? So we got the list, we baselined the behavior, and now we can tell, like some of the information we're getting is scary from that model, but I can now tell where RMMs are being used in a non-obvious way, in an anomalous way. So we have to now chase that down. But that's just an example, right? I could not have asked that question, because if I had, I would have had this enormous list, non-actionable, right? Because we were always able to query our endpoints, right, and get some answers. But to actually go, this is the normal behavior and this is the abnormal behavior, that part is what the data fabric just enables. So that's just the latest example.
That's amazing. So Edna, why are we as an industry, I guess, only getting to this point now? It's 2025, right? There's been a lot of approaches to analysis of security data. Why are we just, having these epiphanies and these inventions now?
Probably you will find different opinions on that, Nicole. Let me give you mine. I think we hit a turning point when COVID came to us. And that turning point was, well, we had the technological capability to allow something that I've done now for 30 years, which is work remotely. We didn't have the percentage of the population of the workforce literally doing it. And so all of a sudden, the need to access data real time in a meaningful way is something that was turned on at a rate of speed and need that we hadn't seen previously. So it was a triggering point for us. And we also had what you often see across many disciplines. So security is not the only one, and I'll liken it to healthcare. Years ago, you had a general practitioner, and the general practitioner knew a lot about their patient. Today, you have specialists, and those specialists have columns of information that they're aware of. But if you talk to your podiatrist, they're not the person who's going to help you with your problem with your neck. Okay, so we did exactly the same thing in the security industry. We created SIMs and SOARs and threat intelligence that came in, and then it had to be blended. And then we said, oh, we worried about insider threat. Let's look at that. And all of a sudden, what we did was create a massive proliferation at a time when there was an exponential uptick on utilization of digital platforms as the means by which we worked, lived, played, learned, and I would dare say even date now. And so this need became so apparent that we are struggling, I think, to get to the place until we have something like this to bring it all together at the time we need and give us the ability to pose queries in a meaningful way and get answers right away.
I absolutely love that analogy of the specialists and the generalist, and I'll just build on that, Edna, too. That is exactly what was happening, right? Like the right hand doesn't quite know what the left hand is doing, and you need to figure out what the whole body is doing to really, really understand how are you going to defend against something. And that is what the data fabric has enabled us to do. Again, it's been a long journey, but today we're at a point where, we have data from close to 100 sources, not just cybersecurity, but, other contextualizing information. And it is all correlated, normalized, ready for use. Now, from that one platform of data, cheap storage, cheap compute, we can do, really disparate things. Your example of a podiatrist versus a heart surgeon, right? So we can do everything from answer questions like, how many of our endpoints at this very second are compliant? So are they running, EDR? Are they running configuration compliance, blah, 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 right? I can do that in near real time. 2, hey, am I detecting an anomalous authentication event out of the billions of authentication events that are happening? And how should I react to that? So it's that spectrum, right? From the podiatrist to the heart surgeon, from just compliance configuration, compliance monitoring to advanced threat hunting. That is what this enables us to do. It's really amazing.
I have a question for you both, because you've both been in the industry far longer than I have. A data lake has been in the IT space for longer than it's been in the security space. Why? What's both of your opinions on why?
I can start. It's, I think in the IT and technology space in general, people are more engineering and computer science focused, and traditionally, and so they are looking to create solutions to answer questions, and they usually don't feel as constrained. Cyber teams, classically, this is changing, but when I started as a CISO 9 years ago, what cyber teams were doing mostly was buying and deploying tools. And, so there was not this kind of engineering, architecture, computer science kind of focus. And I think as that changed, we kind of started going, look, buying yet another tool that duplicates 80% of what my other 100 tools are doing and maybe gives me 20% more. And then, I have to spend forever maintaining it and keeping it up. Why don't I engineer and architect and design a solution that will, that our colleagues were doing similar things? Now, I will tell you one of the things that we've learned Because at Comcast, again, there's huge amount of data that is analyzed and processed for, all kinds of reasons, for business intelligence, for other reasons. The volume of security data is bigger than like a Fortune 30 company running, enormous data programs. So at Comcast right now, the security data lake is the biggest data lake of all the other data lakes that are
Wow.
there. So the
Wow.
volume is overwhelming. Yeah.
That's amazing. And you have, and real quick, I just have one follow-up question for Nooper before I get your perspective on my question. But Nooper, it strikes me you have a wide variety of teams also working on the data in the data lake, right? People with very different types of jobs. Do you have like an approximate, just for our audience here, just number of teams or number of different types of job functions that can now work off of this common architectural approach?
I don't have a number, but I'll list the functions off the
Okay.
top of my head, so I'll miss some. So, the classic threat hunting response, the security AI, security ML, we have dozens of custom models that are operating all the time. Then, vulnerability management. If you look at vulnerability management at scale, even not at scale, it's essentially a data management problem. There's so much data because remember, we're scanning or have agent-based reporting on hundreds of thousands of endpoints. And how do you manage that data, to answer things like, oh, this endpoint was off for a day, but it's back on again, right? And how do we do all of that? So from vulnerability management to threat hunting to AI ML, and then to the compliance use cases, the continuous controls monitoring, the audit support, all of that, all of those functions use the data lake. It's just, we sort of have a rule that anybody who needs data to answer questions, which is more and more of security functions, that the first place we go to is the data lake. And I would say in the past few years, we have been able to find answers to questions without doing much more than what's already there. Maybe add another feed, maybe something like that. But in general, the answer is already there, which is amazing. You just have to reveal it.
That's cool. And now, what do you think?
Why have we always had data lakes? So I have my own theory on that, and I don't think it's security that started it. I think it's security who, quite frankly, is not only maturing it, but creating the need for it to be crystallized and far more useful. I think it grew out of two places. One, customer management, and the second place is ERPs. So for any enterprise that is delivering not a service, but a tangible good, or think of our colleagues in the retail sector, not just IT, what you're thinking about at that point is a volume that is just by way of example, at Cisco, I had somewhere around over 300,000 third parties that touched at one point the life cycle, if you will, of a solution. They were all part of information that we needed from a security and risk perspective. So I think that outcry of the rule that I've talked about for a long time, which is there's more of them than us, and we live in a world of we. So we had better start thinking about a data lake as the lawyer will come out inevitably, Nicole and Nooper, the empirical support for my evidence. And it gives me a way to not only play with it, but validate its accuracy, as well as utilize it to give me decision-making capacity now. So I'm going to see things, but I also can make decisions. And that, as an architectural approach, is really something that I'd like to say security brought to the table.
That is so well said.
Really agree. And one aspect that you hinted at, Edna, is cost. Because, and I hinted at it earlier, because of the sheer volume of data that, security needs. And to do what you just said, establish that lineage so that you can actually prove to audit and regulatory and so on that, look, here is that little source of data. And you can trace it through the whole and go, okay, from that data combined with all this, we came to this decision, right? Both of those things, to do that with the volume of data, with those full regulatory and audit requirements, was very, very expensive to do in non-traditional, in SIMs and so on. So another thing that drove the data lake journey was necessity. We had a certain amount of budget and had certain number of things we needed to, and the budget stayed here, and the things we have to do keep growing, and the data keeps growing. So what's the answer? We had to come up with cheap storage, cheap compute, and openness, because that's the other issue with, by the way, we still use a SIM, so I'm not bashing SIMs at all. But they tend to be restricted to, you don't want everybody in the company to be going to your SIM. So cheap compute, cheap storage, and openness, so that you can very confidently open up the data to all those vertical functions that Nicole was talking about. I think that's what really drove that movement, and how, in your words, Edna, security is leading now in some of these areas.
Newber, I think you outlined very well those three architectural principles, and it naturally brings me to my next question. I think at the end of the day, evidence is based on data. And as more and more regulations come out, they are demanding of our companies to provide more and more evidence of compliance. So Edna, help me understand, what's your view of some of these upcoming regulations, particularly the regulatory risks and penalties, right, that enterprises or CISOs might face if they're not able to adopt more advanced approaches to, for example, insider threat hunting and some of these other, challenges that we see the more and more we innovate in the digital space. What's your perspective on that?
So three things I propose. One is there needs to be more public-private partnership, because a lot of our regulators and legislators are so well-intended, but may not necessarily be steeped in the architectural models and or the technological operations of how we get there. So I always, anytime I get a chance to have a voice, encourage people who have expertise and care about fidelity, integrity, and security to please join forces with those of us who are working with democratic nations around the world to do that. One. Two, I think we're seeing the need to explain that criminal penalties for individuals who are, quite frankly, using broad capabilities to develop and then monitor from a security perspective the effectiveness of their work to protect those who use our solutions is not solving the problem. So, we've had years and years. I always go back to, we have this wonderful, rich history. We just talked about the medical industry. We have rich history on whether, there's always exceptions, but there are some people who deserve to be in jail forever. But as a general rule, incarcerating humans hasn't proven to be a solution to criminal behavior, has it? So what we ought to be doing is not penalizing, but thinking about regulatory schemas that say, I want to know more, but I want to know it in an environment where it is a novel thought, the concept of the principle of least privilege, so that we're not sharing indiscriminately, and we are not in any way putting it out into the hands of, for anybody who plays on the dark web. I always love when things come out. Newber, I suspect you have team members who do this as well. When something pops out, I always look and I see what is being said. And sometimes they're very excited, those who would engage in nefarious activity, because it's going to give them higher degree of visibility, right? So that's a plea. What can we do about it? We can be more connected more transparent, and leverage an architectural approach, know where our data is, know how to access it, and utilize it to our own advantage. It may not always speed us up, but it will provide, Newper just articulated, if you will, the history, right? So it's not just your history, it's the entire life cycle approach that you take. Why did you do this? And that's where I think we can make a huge difference with data. But I am very concerned about requests to actually see that. And if you look at what's going on just now, for example, in the US, in a well-intended effort to optimize and make more efficient our US government, we may have people who are looking at things that they may not need to look at, and they surely do not have the security in place to utilize it in an effective and closed environment. So that's what, an architectural approach with a fabric can take us to. Here it is. Here's what I did. I may be wrong, but let's work on it together. But here it is. It always works when you can show somebody something. There's an old saying, we all know it. Picture's worth 1,000 words. There's a reason why.
Yeah, really well said. The only thing I would add to that is, it's sometimes the regulations seem to punish the victims, and that is just not the right way to drive the right behavior. So, I'll just give an example. A company, let's say like ours, that is, really investing in cyber. We are doing our best. We're innovating. We are, we have over 1,000 cyber professionals at Comcast working on cybersecurity, and they're all very mission driven. And it is asymmetrical warfare. And, you've heard this a million times, but I'll just repeat it, right? We have to be right all the time. The adversary has to be right just once, right? And so I think regulations that punish the victim, even when the victim can show that, look, we did our best, it's never 100%. I think those are counterproductive. So again, well-intentioned. I think our regulators are well-intentioned. They want to do the right thing. But we just need to come together to see how do we do the right incentives instead of the right punishments to get the right behaviors that we need from, there's no company that wakes up in the morning and says, I won't do enough today to protect my customers or my employees or my colleagues, right? So how do we put the right incentives in place? That is my biggest, and we work with our regulators very closely, and we usually end up in an okay place.
So Nupur, from the perspective of preparing for some of these regulatory audits, for example, the common one of checking to see that security controls are in place, can you talk a little bit about how the data fabric architecture may make that more efficient or easier? What's your perspective on that architectural approach to showing evidence of compliance?
Yeah, it has really changed the way our compliance works. So I'll just tell you, a few years ago, 5, 6 years ago, let's just say PCI audits, for example, right? There would be this time of the year, about the end of year, where literally my email box would be full of, I won't, hate mail is a strong word, but, very dissatisfied, the controller, the treasurer, right, like, what's going on with PCI compliance? Where are we? What? And the last few, I don't even know when we got our ROC, because it is so drama free. It's just, we went to PCI 4. I talked to my GRC lead, said, hey, PCI 4 is coming. Are we okay? This was like April, May. And he's like, yeah, we have already got our ROC. we're already compliant, right? And the reason is that the controls that are needed for PCI, and really we kind of use those controls everywhere. We now have a way to know their actual state in almost near real time. And because they come from, Edna, your comment earlier about a trusted source of truth that the audit team agrees to, yep, this is the right source, the engineering teams agree to, my team agrees to, the compliance people agree to, yes, these are the right sources, we vetted them, we trust them. There's no constant, I passed you a spreadsheet, it's out of date the minute you open it, and then you have this constant argument, your data isn't right. We just don't have those arguments anymore.
That's
So
amazing.
it's really changed the way we do compliance.
So last question for you both. This conversation is fantastic, and I feel like we could go for another hour here. But the last topic after regulations that I want to discuss with you is AI, right? It's this buzzword. AI's been around for some time as well, but it seems like that word really kind of woke up when generative was put in front of it, right? And now it's all Gen AI, and everyone's making these investments. And I see people who say, I've got generative AI on my 2025 priority list. And then I ask them, well, how's your data? And sometimes they look at me like, what is she talking about? Right. So I want both of your perspective. Where does getting data in a good state fall relative to your priorities to have your team using AI or writing prescriptive AI models or implementing generative AI? What is the relationship between AI and data, and how should a leader be thinking about both? Edna, let's go to you first.
Well, that's a sweet spot for me because I've been working on this with the U.S. government to think about how we actually build data integrity and accuracy through the life cycle of a large language model. So think ingestion, analysis, and output. And at no point should anybody think that this will not involve a human. But what it does involve is something that Newper hit on, which is the place where integrated data that has been vetted can be accessed, evaluated, utilized, and if necessary, corrected. And so for me, I think data lies at the bottom of ensuring we can actually capitalize on the power of large language models. We're not quite there yet. More to come.
I totally agree. There are very few of us who are going to be building our own LLMs, right? We're going to be using, probably more of the small customized ones than the large ones. But, at least that's what I see my team doing now. And what will differentiate us is, how do we train those small those small general purpose LLMs with our custom data. So that data is, the key. But the other area where I see, promise, and Nicole DataBee has implemented Beekeeper AI, which is something again that we also use internally, is to simplify rote security tasks. So, for example, a very common issue we have in security is asset ownership. So I call that the unicorn of, because people talk about a perfect CMDB. I've never seen one, right? But a CMDB is a configuration management database that keeps up with, what your assets are. And a cyber program is as good as, knowing where the assets are and who owns the assets. So when you find an issue with the asset, you can reach out to the owner. So you can have a security operations center spend hours. Here's an issue. Think it belongs, we see it on this asset, can't find the owner in the CMDB. We think this is the owner because, we can run a model to tell us who the likely owner is. But now I have to reach out to that person to confirm. Mm-hmm. So that kind of conversation that can take a security operations center and a analyst time can now be just automated with Gen AI, with the AI reaches out to the person, presents them with all the information, and asks that simple question: based on this, are you the owner? And they can just say yes or no. And it's just like, that is just one example of how Gen AI is really helping with the operational side of.
So, Nooper, your organization is really taking human workflow automation to the next level, right? It sounds like first you focus on the evidence, on the data, making sure all the teams have the right information to do their jobs, to answer the questions that you or others may be posing of them. And now that you have that, it sounds like you're now looking at how do I get those efficiencies? How do I really, help my people, you know, for example, vulnerability SLAs, right? How do they actually do better as a vulnerability manager by improving the performance against SLAs, by reducing the gaps, right, in where there might be vulnerabilities through something like, building an AI chatbot, on a data set. I have to imagine you probably have a whole list of innovations in other areas in your organization where you're going to be using AI chatbots or things of the like, right, to kind of automate.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, just think about anomalous logins, right? You have to then reach out to the person and go, hey, we noticed this weird alarm. Can you help us understand it? That asynchronous communication can take days. A bot can do it, you know, just offload that. So yes, the use cases are never ending.
So one more question, Edna, do you think there is a future where there could be an AI chatbot that owns the full end-to-end detection, response, recovery? You think it's possible, or maybe part of it? What do you? Because I've heard CISOs talk about this. Hey, can I have a robot essentially, right, and an AI chatbot handle looking at the different detections, handle running the playbooks in my store, handle communicating the recovery plan, or do you think that it's always going to be a mix, right, of AI with humans checking it and humans enabling it? What's your perspective on that? I can't hear Edna.
Am I muted?
Oh, there you go.
Forgive me. If they asked me what to name artificial intelligence, I would have named it enhanced intelligence, because I am firmly in the camp that you cannot remove humans completely. I think there will be some types of identified detection problems that can then be automated. But I do think you're always going to have humans in it. And that's why you talked previously about the fact that we're evolving to human risk management, away from some of the old school thinking of it's just in this silo as we started. We're now expanding because security has taken us to the full spectrum of the way humans interact with the digital world.
And I think that's a very intelligent response.
Yeah, totally agree. I don't see it, but I may still live to be surprised. But that human curiosity that makes you do that. Ooh, I wonder what would happen if I tried this. Is just I don't see how that gets replaced.
That's right. I don't think a chatbot could ever be too curious.
Yes.
Well, ladies, thank you so much. This has been a really rich and enjoyable conversation. I've certainly learned a lot from you both today, and I hope our audience has as well. I just want to thank you for taking the time to share your perspectives and insights, and to also thank our viewers for taking the time to join us today. We've covered a lot of ground, and if you want to get in on the conversation or ask a question of one of us, please reach out directly via the email address on your screen, databee_info@comcast.com. Thank you again for joining, and have a great day.